Hi everyone, my name is Nirmay Kishore. Today I'll be presenting my work in progress research on resident engagement in public housing redevelopment with a focus on Flemington Towers. This project looks at the gap between what government promises in terms of including residents in decision and what residents actually experience. In Victoria, we are seeing some of the biggest changes to public housing in decades through Big Housing Build initiative and the Public Housing Renewal program. The official goals are positive to modernize older estates, improve safety, sustainability, and create more housing supply. On papers, residents are meant to be central to these processes. Consulted about decision, design, planning, and relocation. But why does this matter? Because housing is not just about buildings, it's about people, their community, and their sense of belonging. If engagement is only tokenistic, tenants can feel ignored, fearful, and even displaced. Communities that have been built over decades can be broken apart. Flemington is really important case study here because thousands of people live in these towers. Many are immigrants, migrants, refugee, and low-income backgrounds. For them, redevelopment is not just about policy; it's about everyday life. For the key issue I'm focusing is this engagement genuine empowerment or just a tick a box process that legitimizes decisions that have already been made? Billions of dollars are being invested in public housing renewal. The stated goals are good: livability, sustainability, and safety. But residents often report getting late notice about redevelopment, having very little to say in key decision, experiencing stress and fear around relocation. This highlights a major gap between the policy promise of participation and lived reality of tokenism. And it raises deeper question: who actually benefits from redevelopment and whose voices are being left out? So, for my research aim is to examine the role and effect of resident engagement in redevelopment. The objectives are pretty clear. It's about analyzing policy frameworks, evaluating consultation and co-design processes, investigating lived experiences through submissions and advocacy. So to cover everything, I would be focusing on Flemington Towers as a case study and finally proposing the recommendation for more inclusive engagement. The main research question is, how are residents engaged in public housing redevelopment and what impacts does this engagement have on project outcomes and community experiences? My early findings suggest there is a big gap between what's said and what's done. Government documents use strong language about fairness, transparency, and respect. But it says different story when you see the resident submissions. There are around 807 resident submissions on Parliament inquiry, from which I'll be focusing on just three of these, which has a lack of meaningful consultation, fear of uncertainty about relocation, inadequate compensation, and policy housing offers, and the risk of losing community connection. There are advocacy groups such as Rahu, which is also called as Renters and Housing Union, and SPHU, which is also called as the Save Public Housing Collective, argues the process much developer driven than resident led. They call for refurbishment instead of demolition and for planning that is genuinely community led. So far, the evidence shows engagement often feels symbolic rather than real. And to frame this, I use theories of participation and housing justice. Anston's ladder of participation shows a scale of tokenism at the bottom at the tokenism at the bottom and genuine citizen control at the top. Most current engagement sits at the lower rungs. An IAP2 spectrum warns about participatory washing when consultation is used. When consultation is just used to justify pre-made decisions. Others researches supports these concerns over engagement and social justice. Artisan and Whitson shows how poor consultation leads to displacement and social breakdown. Roy highlights housing is about justice and dignity and not just about shelter. There are international cases like London's Aylesbury Estate and Toronto's Regent Park, which shows consultation didn't just stop mass displacement. In Australia, Weasel and others shows broken trust when communication is weak and developers take priority. Together, this literature help explain why policy practice gaps at Flemington matters. There are few Victorian policy frameworks which you can look forward is about paving the way forward, big housing build homes Victoria, inquiry submissions that reveal persistent and resident dissatisfaction. For my project, I use qualitative case study approach. The data that includes our policy documents like paving the way forward, housing build updates, public submissions to Victorian Parliament inquiry, the advocacy reports for groups such as Rahu, SPHU, Tenant Victoria. I'll also be analyzing the media reports from outlets like The Guardian and ABC. I'll analyze this using the thematic coding based on Brown and Clark. Deductive codes will draw from Anston's ladder and IAP2 spectrum. Inductive codes will capture themes like mistrust, relocation stress, and cultural barriers. This way, I can compare official frameworks from what residents and advocates actually say. For my work plan, my semester work plan looks like this. Week 7 to 9, we have completed, so I'll not repeat that. For week 10, I'll be synthesizing findings into policy versus residents' experiences. For week 11, I'll be writing up findings and recommendations with peer feedback, and week 12, I'll be finalizing the report. To wrap this up, redevelopment policies promise fairness, transparency, and engagement. But residents' experience at Flemington reveals something different: stress, uncertainty, and risk of losing community. This case highlights the wider policy practice gap in public housing renewal. My next step are to finish coding submissions and advocacy material and then develop recommendation for more equitable and resident-centered engagement. Ultimately, this research matters because it's not just about buildings. It's about people's lives, stability, and justice. Thank you for listening, and I'll be happy to take any questions or feedback. Thank you so much.